Before starting to delve into specific definitions, it's necessary to define how civil aviation is divided to lay the foundations for what we will explain in the following tutorials. We have therefore created a pyramid in which the macro sectors can be identified, i.e. the main groupings which then divide, descending the pyramid, into the specific sectors that define the purpose of the operations and finally into the categories of the air vehicles used. These are concepts that are difficult to find in books because they range in various topics and regulations. However, it is precisely because our tutorials aim to clarify these aspects that normally remain hidden or difficult to understand that we believe it's essential to start here. Let's start with the identification of the three macro sectors of civil aviation: commercial aviation, general aviation, and recreational flight. Let's proceed with the definition of the first macro sector, commercial aviation. This group includes all the for-profit activities from scheduled flights to air taxis, from helicopter rescue to flight schools, from aerial work with helicopters to firefighting to work with drones. To carry out these activities, the air vehicles used are those that hold the type of certificate issued by an aviation authority. These can be defined in a single phrase: certified aircraft, i.e. the categories of airplanes, helicopters, tilt rotors, gliders, airships, hot air balloons, or rather free balloons, and drones. To these, it's obviously necessary to connect all the sectors that do not deal purely with flight operations, but rather play a supporting role, such as design, construction, maintenance, technical management, and air traffic control. Let's move on to the second macro sector, general aviation, which includes all the private, non-profit activities of enthusiasts who fly for fun, owners of aircraft, or members of aero clubs. Compared to the first group, the air vehicles used are the same, but the purposes for flying are different. The third macro sector is that of recreational flights, which has the same prerogatives as general aviation, such as it doesn't carry out commercial activities except the exercise of flying schools and tandem flights, but rather is distinguished by the categories of vehicles used or the weight limit of which they're subjected to. In fact, the classic categories of this world are parachuting, paragliders, and hang gliders. Then there are the light sport aircraft that overlap in some ways with aircraft even if they're not legally part of it because they don't hold the type certificate. In fact, they are technically fully fledged aircraft or helicopters, but as they're under 600 kilograms of the maximum takeoff weight, or even less as imposed by some national authorities, are not part of general aviation. It's important to be able to understand this overlap so as to understand how to approach this sector. So, what is the difference between a general aviation powered aircraft and a light sport aircraft? Well, from a technical point of view, as we have already said, it's the weight. But from a regulatory point of view, it's a question of competencies. The regulations for the management of the entire light sport fleet, in fact, both for the technical and operational and training components, have been delegated by national aviation authorities to third entities, for example, the National Aero Clubs Association. They can be managed easier than a certified aircraft, and for this reason, they have many limitations. Before we carry on with the other tutorials, let's try to summarize the basic concepts with this table. There are three macro sectors. Each has a specific purpose. Each of them is then divided into specific sectors that regulate their operations, and finally each operation has its own category of aircraft used. For each, there is a specific certification issued by aviation authorities or by third entities, so a light sport aircraft cannot carry out public passenger transport, a private owner cannot perform firefighting actions, and an airline cannot train pilots unless it holds a training certificate. Everything in aviation is certified, checked, and constantly improved. Nothing is left to chance. In the same way as the sectors are, air vehicles are similarly distinguished. Light sports aircrafts are not certified aircraft. Attention then needs to be given to the distinctions between certified aeroplanes and helicopters and light sport uncertified aeroplanes and helicopters. When you read in the newspapers that, for example, a Robinson 22 is a light sport aircraft, it is extremely wrong, because the Robinsons are aviation certified aircrafts. We can forgive journalists for these mistakes, but if you want to enter the aeronautical world, it is better to write down these differences. With this tutorial, you've had your first approach to technical terminology, to the bodies that control this world, and to the first aeronautical definitions. We will now start with the description of all aeronautical licenses related to general and commercial aviation. After, you will also find information on courses for sport flying, drones, technicians, regulations, and much more. If you have any questions or curiosities, contact us at info@checkbeforeflight.com or refer to the definitions in Wiki Before Flight. Happy landings.